Of NAMI Tennessee at Home Live. Before we get started, I want to tell everybody you don't want to miss anything. Legislative advocacy, conferences, walks, events, stuff like the NAMI at Home series. Everything that NAMI Tennessee is doing, you can find out in one simple way. Just sign up for NAMI Tennessee's email list. It's absolutely free. Just go over to namitn.org and sign up. It's also a really cool website that has a lot of great information. All right, well, that's enough of that. Let's bring on our great guest, Jules. Will you introduce yourself,
Hello.
please?
Yes, sure. Well, hello, y'all. I'm Jules Wilson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm super excited to be here. I've always been a longtime fan of NAMI. I've loved anytime I get to collaborate with them. You may know me from working in state or local government, collaborating with nonprofit partners. Mostly I focus around mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, advocacy, accessibility. If there's a way to get involved in activism, I'm probably trying my best to do that. But thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be here. We know how busy it is being an activist. There's never enough time, there's never enough people, and there's never enough money. So taking time away from your schedule to do this is super, super, super appreciated. All right, are you ready to jump into our topic?
Yeah, let's jump in.
So first and foremost, our topic is on the screen, but for those who don't want to read, who might just be listening in the background, today's topic is being inclusive is suicide prevention, something that I absolutely agree with, and something like organizations like the Trevor Project have proven time and time again with research and studies and honoring people for who they are absolutely helps their mental health. It's not a controversial statement, yet there is often pushback. So let's just lead right with that, Jules. So all right, as we jump in to the topic, the first question that we are going to pose to you, Jules, you introduced yourself with your pronouns. Can you elaborate on your reason for doing that?
Sure. So pronouns serve both a grammatical purpose and a communication purpose. And I'm an English nerd. I have my bachelor's in English, so forgive me if you're not super into grammar, but a pronoun literally takes the place of a noun. And so my name is Jules. Jules is a noun, a proper noun, if you will indulge me, because I am a proper person. And a pronoun, they, replaces my name. And so sometimes I'll hear folks say, oh, I don't use pronouns. And I'll say, okay, well, do you not say you, we, me, I, us? Those are all pronouns that we use on a daily basis. And when if I'm trying to refer to you, I'm not going to say your name every single time I talk about you. At some point, I'm going to say, he is a great host. So I ask that you do the same thing for me. And by introducing myself with my pronouns, I'm communicating to you, hey, here are the pronouns I want you to use for me. This is how you can refer to me.
Thank you so much. Moving on, like you said, people say that they don't use them. Do you get pushback for using your pronouns?
Yes, I have personally gotten pushback for it. I've seen a lot of people get pushback for it. I think that people view saying your pronouns as a very political thing when in reality it's just as simple as me saying my name. It's an extension of that principle in itself. And so it is pretty hurtful when somebody tries to discourage you from not using your pronouns or trying to not introduce yourself with your pronouns, because that essentially is saying, I would like you to open up the opportunity for people to misgender you because I value uh, other people's interpretations of us as not being political as more important than you not being misgendered. And so it is really unfortunate.
You mentioned politics a couple of times, and my grandmother always says that politics happens when there's two or more people in a room, and I agree with her. But this has become political, and it's nobody's fault in this room. And truthfully, the majority of people I see debating this, arguing about this, getting their feathers ruffled, they're not in like why I I'm trying to ask you, Jules,
Mhm.
because you have now become the elected spokesperson.
I've
Why
invited
did this?
myself for the question.
Yes, why did this become political? It seems like
Mhm.
it's just such a personal preference. Like, I don't know if Jules is your given name, but for example, my given name is Gabriel. Whenever
Mhm,
I ask people to call me Gabe, I get zero pushback. People see on the form
mhm,
Gabriel, because that's what's on all of my documents, right? Gabriel Howard. And they
mhm.
say, "Is Gabriel here?" And I say, "Yes, please call me Gabe." And they call me Gabe. The end.
It's
It's
yep,
over.
yep.
It didn't become political. I know this is a very loaded question and a very big question, but why did it become political, and how can we put out some of those fires so that we can just get along?
Yeah, so I think you just illustrated one of my biggest talking points for me, so thank you for doing that. Because I always when I'm trying to get folks on board, and it's horrible and unfortunate that we have to get folks on board with this idea, but I mean, we're all having to learn new ideas every day though, so I do have empathy, is that I say, "Well, if your child want is named Alexander and they wanted to go by Alex, you would never question that. You would say, "Okay, this is the name that fits you." Jules is not my legal name. I'm named after my great aunt Julie, who actually her legal name was Marianne or Mariana, and she went by Julia and then went by Jules. So anytime someone in my family tries to give me grievance about going by a nickname, I'm like, can we talk about how I didn't know her legal name until I was 25? Anyways, I digress. Um, the reason I think it became political is that it started to reflect trans, non binary, and gender non-conforming individuals wanting to be respected. And that is a concept that is really difficult for some people to accept that we exist and we wish to take up space. We wish to be equal parts of the conversation and we wish to not hide who we are. And so the audacity of us to ask people to refer to us by our correct name and correct pronouns, as I like to call them, instead of preferred pronouns, because it is not a preference. This is just who I am. You know, it's a preference is for me to have purple hair. I like having purple hair, but it's not a necessity. It's not something that is going to really ruin my life if I can't have purple hair. It's not really nice, but I can deal with it. But being told that I can't go by my name or I can't be referred to with the correct language, that is dehumanizing. And so I think that's in essence how it became a political thing because we've been using pronouns for as long as language has existed.
The I always like to expand on analogies because this is the fun part of podcasts. We have a lot of time. It's not an 800-word article trying to take up column space in a newspaper, and I think uh, John Wayne was not John Wayne's real name. It's a persona that he adapted when he decided to go out in the world. Now, he did that, I'm going to say, for his career. I don't know exactly why he changed his name, but many people in Hollywood and in the music industry, they change their name because it sells better,
Mhm.
right? If you want to be a heavy metal artist and your name is, Chad Smith, right? Chad Smith just doesn't sound like a thrasher. So all of a
Yes, there's
sudden
like
your name
a nice
becomes
boy
Trent
in a bow
Reznor.
tie. Yes.
Right, right, right. But Vin Diesel was not born a Vin Diesel, right?
Mhm.
And we understand this and we accept it, and it's no problem. Again, Hollywood musicians. I'm not trying to beat it to death. It seems like our culture has accepted this idea of when you become an adult, you can play with your name. We have all done it.
Mhm.
I haven't even gotten into women changing their name when they get married, and now we see
Oh, yeah.
hyphenations. We see men's changing their name. Again, this is well accepted in society. So I have to say, just to get people thinking about it, if you're okay with all of those changes, but then you get to this one, and all of a sudden you have a problem, and you say it's because of the name change or the pronoun or it, you might want to think that that's not it. I'm not. I'm saying nothing more than that, just to give it some
Mhm.
thought, to move yourself forward, maybe ask some questions, and consider what your motivation might be. When we're
Yes.
talking about, it's a mental health podcast, and of course we're talking about suicide prevention and why inclusion is super important to suicide prevention. I wanted to ask you, what's the mental health impact of dead naming and or misgendering someone? Because I know from talking to you before the show,
Mhm.
it's a really big deal.
Mhm. Yes, and I don't think people think it's a big deal, which is why they're like, "Oh, it's no big deal if I don't use your correct pronouns or your correct name." But the fact is that when you misgender or dead name someone, it is causing psychological harm to them. Um, I can't remember the quote, the person who said the quote off the top of my head. I'll have to find it during a break. But they just said misgendering is an act of violence. Just look at it straight and simple like that. It may not be as physically aggressive as we might imagine some other forms of discrimination and prejudice are, but it's also a very simple thing. If someone does not respect me enough as a human being to say my name or my pronouns right, I don't feel seen or heard by them. I don't feel like they value me as a person. And then you go down the line of thinking they don't value my life. I mean, I don't really know how else people expect us to feel if you're not willing to acknowledge our existence and respect us at the bare minimum. I think people get caught up in why do you spend so much time talking about pronouns? There's so many other trans issues to dive into. And that is true, but it's because we get stuck at this level. If we can't get past this point, I don't know how to ask our allies to get even more in depth into other issues related to being trans and non-binary. And so there have been there's so many statistics out there about the high rates of suicide in the LGBTQ population, but in particular, the highest ones are with the trans population. And you have to think a lot of it comes down to a lack of acceptance. Anyone here who has struggled with suicidal ideation knows that a lot of it comes from, I don't feel like I have a place in this world, or I don't feel like I have hope. And I think anything we can do to make someone feel like they belong is essential.
One of the key components of suicide prevention, of course, is seeing people, right? Is
Mhm,
noticing them. And I'm not talking about inclusion or diversity. As a cisgendered, middle-aged white male, I felt very alone just because that's what my brain was telling me.
mhm,
Right. So I want to be very clear, like that's Gabe Howard's experience. That's my level. I can only imagine if somebody told me that I wasn't my name, I wasn't my gender, I wasn't my
mhm,
soul, I wasn't my personality, I wasn't, we can use, I've heard many, many words from advocates such as yourself, Jules. And I think, wow, I had a lot going on, right, when I was suicidal, and I didn't have that. So I think if people start thinking about it that way, you're already in a very dark and lonely place, and how much is society contributing to that dark lonely
mhm,
place? For me, I didn't have that. Again, I want to be, respectful. That was not for me. But I just, yeah, my mom didn't tell me that she wouldn't call me by my name. Like that would be a lot. uh,
mhm.
how how can people around somebody, I mean, I know the answer, and I'm having trouble forming the question because
Yeah.
it's call somebody by their pronouns, call someone by the names that they want to use, respect them as a person. I want to ask you a question to get you to talk about that more.
Mhm.
So,
I think
how?
I know where you're going. Yes. I'll see. I'll go down the path, and you tell me if maybe we need to walk down a different one. Is that I think sometimes people feel stuck on if it's this simple and folks aren't getting it, then what the heck am I supposed to do? And
Yes.
what I usually tell people is, like, for example, I had someone ask me at a recent training, um my sibling's child has come out as trans. How can I be supportive of them? They've told us their new pronouns and their new name. And I really want to be the biggest supporter I can, but I don't want to go over the top. And I also want to help our other family members get on board because that's where people get stuck sometimes is I can do it, but my family members, my friends, they're just not supportive. Is
Right.
that you can be that person's number one ally. You can always make sure you say their name and pronouns a lot. What I'll do around people is if I notice they're getting misgendered or dead named, I'll just kind of emphasize their name. So let's say I'm talking about my friend Marsha. Marsha's not a real person. That's why I had to think of a fake name. And people are dead naming her. And I'll just say, well, Marsha told me the other day this really great story about how she went to the mall. And I'll just kind of make a little face at people and try to almost like a wink, wink. And that helps get some people to remember, like, oh, okay, 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 okay. Sorry, I need to focus on remembering this more. And Then there's people who will continue fighting you on it, and that's when I would try to do a one-on-one conversation and say, do you want this person alive and do you want them well? If we have to get down to that bare bones part of it, that's what I would say to hit the heart of, is saying you can either choose to have this person in your life pretending to be someone they're not. You can continue to see whatever ghost version of them that you want to see, because that's who they're seeing by choosing not to see the real person. Or you can choose to have an amazing relationship with this person. You get to see their full presence, their full beauty, everything that they can bring to this earth. Because from what I've heard from a lot of people after transitioning or at least coming out, is that they become so much happier and they get to finally express themselves and be true to every part of themselves. Doesn't mean they're magically cured of any of their mental illness, but gender dysphoria is not a mental illness. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. And getting to be yourself is a pretty immediate boost to the self esteem.
There's always this concept of I don't understand it, therefore I don't like it. And that seems to be when I talk to a lot of people who are struggling with a friend, family member, coworker, whomever. It's like, well, I don't like it, I don't understand it, it makes me uncomfortable.
Mhm,
And the pushback that I always give as an ally, and this is what I was taught to do, so please tell me if it is correct. The
mhm,
pushback that I always give as an ally is, so what? So what if you're not comfortable? So what if you don't understand it? So like the basic level of respect doesn't dictate this understanding or this
mhm,
like or this none of that is really relevant. You are allowed to be all of those things and still show somebody respect. Is
mhm.
that a good way of looking at it for a person if they're like, look, I don't understand, but I can still treat you with dignity and respect just because I'm confused or even uncomfortable?
I think that's half of it. I think you're halfway there. So you're not quite wrong. You're close.
Good, good,
And
good.
that the next step I would say to take down that pathway is you are allowed to be uncomfortable, but you can figure that out in your own time. You don't need to put that pressure on the person in your life who you're trying to support. There are plenty of spaces you can come to, like this one. There's people who say, I'm having a hard time with this. I'm going to go seek out resources. I'm going to go read articles. I'm going to go watch webinars. I'm going to go watch the NAMI podcast and try to figure out what is it that I'm uncomfortable with and start to examine that. Um, when you choose to put all of that emotional baggage on the person who is just trying to be themselves, from my experience and from talking to others, it makes us feel almost like we're sorry for being ourselves. It's almost like when someone over apologizes for misgendering us, it makes us wish we had never brought it up in the first place because it just brings so much unwanted attention to yourself. And that can just make you super uncomfortable. But I think you're close because it's a similar principle, and in previous life I worked a lot with youth development and positive youth and adult empowerment. And something I would say to parents, including my own parents, is teenagers are going to do a lot of stuff that you don't understand. uh, you're going to wonder why you have to break curfew every night. Why did you have to sneak into that house that's under construction? Just random things that teenagers do. You're not going to understand it. But that doesn't mean that they don't deserve your support. You would never look at your kid and say, I'm not going to support you even though I don't understand you. What you do instead is you listen to them, you let them cry on your shoulder if they need to, and you carry on, and maybe you try to give some advice, some sage wisdom, but you don't disown your child just because they have friends you don't like, or you don't understand. You still keep trying as a parent.
Is that I know we're on parents for a moment, and I want to talk about that for a moment. Is trying acceptable? Some parents believe that if they try and they get it wrong, that's even more problematic, and they shut down and they don't want to try. Moving this forward, is it better to try and fail or not try at all?
That is such a great question, and I don't know if any of us are ever qualified to answer it, but I'll take a try at it. Um, I will always say that trying is better than not trying. Doing something to show your child or your loved one that you care and that you are making an effort, that alone I view as much better than not trying. And personally, for me, I'd rather see somebody try to get my pronouns, try to use my pronouns and get them wrong 6 times out of 10 than just 100% of the time not even bother because they know they can't get it right. Because I will feel safer with the person who's trying than the person who doesn't show me. Because even if they're thinking about it, there's no way for me to know. There's no way for me to know that they're trying to sit there and go, "Oh, I'm messing up their pronouns," unless they say something to me. Um, Eventually, over time, if there's not any progress happening, I think that's where it is really fair to get frustrated and say, "I need you to step it up." And I know there are folks who are always going to say, at some point, they set a boundary of either meet these rules or don't be in my life. And I respect that.
Right.
I think it takes a lot for a person to get to that point to be like, if you misgender me, I can't be your friend. There's some point I can imagine that person probably went through a lot to get to that point. But in general, I think it is probably better to try, and you can always pull the person aside one on one and be like, I am trying. Is there anything else I can do to better support you?
Jules, thank you. There's a question that came in. It's an anonymous question, but the question is, what is dead naming? Can you explain
Yes.
dead naming to our audience?
Yes, and I apologize for not defining it when I first said it, and I'll do the same thing for misgendering. So, dead naming is the principle of using usually a trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming person's previous name that they went by. So, this is in best practice, but for the sake of explaining it, I'm going to use someone's dead name. So, there is a celebrity who recently came out as a trans man, and they're now going by the name Elliot Page. Um, and someone might be like, who is Elliot? I don't know who that is because a lot of the news articles that wrote coverage about it are using best practice and not referring to Elliot by their dead name. And so they're saying, oh, Juno star Elliot Page comes out as trans. For the sake of explaining it to you, this lovely audience who is here to learn and try to be a better ally, I will say that Elliot Page's name that they used to go by was Ellen. So if the article had spent all this time saying Ellen was in Juno and Ellen did this and now they're in this movie, when we know now that their name is Elliot, that would be dead naming. Uh, who came up with the idea and the phrasing exactly, I'm not sure. I will say not every person who goes by a different name who is trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming feels like their previous name is a dead name. I don't feel like mine is. It never felt like my name, but I still feel respect for it in a way, if that makes sense. I don't feel particularly super upset when someone uses it, but I only prefer that family use it, if that makes sense. Like I have boundaries around it. And there's some people
Of
where
course, of course.
they get called their dead name and it is a huge act of psychological harm. Misgendering is essentially calling someone, referring to them by the wrong gender. If you, it's usually an act of intention. I know that Elliot Page is a trans man, uses, I think, they, he pronouns. So they, them, and he, him, I think are fine. Um, and misgendering would be to continue to refer to them as she. So it's usually intentional, but can also happen accidentally.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jules. So back to the topic of inclusion in suicide prevention, which is super important, obviously. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is DEI,
Mhm.
even fit into mental health at all? Some people believe these are two separate things and never shall meet.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, and I have to give kudos to the previous places I've worked that really instilled in me the essence and importance of cultural responsiveness, which is my way of referring to it. Everyone has a different way. Some people say cultural competence. I like saying responsiveness because it means to me, I see a culture that maybe I'm not familiar with, and I learned the best way to respond to it and to integrate it into our care. competence to me implies a level of intelligence in understanding cultures. And I don't think we're ever going to be fully competent in any culture we learn about. I want us to always be learning new things about different populations. But the reason it's important is that if you are trying to work on your mental health and your provider, let's say, doesn't understand your religion and how that plays into your mental health and your relationship with God, let's say, it's going to be hard for you to make progress because maybe you won't feel safe talking to them about it. Maybe they're asking you so many questions to try to understand that you feel kind of like you're being interviewed rather than trying to be there to get help. So having a therapist or a provider who is culturally responsive and knows enough about your culture to work with you without making you feel awkward or like the person just doesn't get it
Right.
is essential.
Thank you so much. I want to stay on the point you said. It feels like you're being interviewed instead
Yeah.
of working on your issues. Now, again, I have the advantage of being a middle-aged cisgendered white man. I can tell you honestly, I have never experienced that in my life having gone
Mhm.
to therapy. I always feel like I've gotten straight to the therapy. Can you, and many people in our viewership, not that I know all of our viewers, but
Mhm.
many people have said to me, well, I don't understand why it's a problem. This
Yeah.
is this repeats over and over again. Well, they say that, but I don't see why it's a problem.
Mhm.
I can't explain why it's a problem because it's not my experience. You touched on it a little bit where you said
Mhm.
you feel like you're being interviewed rather than working on it. Can you elaborate on that? Because we
Mhm.
only get 42 minutes in therapy. So if you really
Yes.
feel like you're trying to educate your therapist, you're right. You're not
Yes.
moving forward. Say
Yes.
more, way more about that.
Yes. Thank you. And I was gonna say thank you for getting that the point is that if you are getting stuck and bogged down in details, just trying to educate your provider, how the heck are you supposed to make progress in that short amount of time? So I'll use an example of someone who I really loved her as a provider, and she had I this wasn't hurtful in any way, but it was something upon reflection later that I realized was something that was a little more difficult for me to adapt to is that I had a provider who just genuinely didn't know a lot about gender identity. And it had not been a problem up until that point because I hadn't been aware that I was really struggling with my gender identity. I'd been kind of suppressing it. And then it just kind of came out of the COVID box, as it did for a lot of people who were sitting at home with their thoughts for long enough. And so we had this kind of awkward conversation essentially in which she was trying to understand the language I was using and why I was using it and what does this identity mean and what about that. And I realized like I'm confused enough as it is to not have I need my provider to be able to make me feel less confused. I don't even know how to explain this yet, and this is obviously before I got super more educated on the topic, but that was one time versus I was talking to a provider once to kind of interview them to see if they'd be a good fit. And she started talking to me about chronic illnesses and management. And I realized I'd never had a conversation with a provider who was a mental health provider who was more aware and educated about chronic illness management and chronic pain and how that impacted mental health. And I realized in that moment how essential how much I needed it and how much it had been lacking from my care. So I've had the awkward interview conversation that wasn't harmful in the moment. It was just genuinely, we were both very confused to, wow, I feel so much more at home, at peace, ready to make progress because this person is showing me that they see me in a way that I didn't know I needed to be seen. And I have a person in my life who is Mexican and he's Mexican American and his therapist is Mexican American. And now he's like, I don't think I can ever see another therapist that isn't also having this kind of experience of being in between worlds because he's like, I've never been able to really explain it to somebody who is just 100% white. And now he doesn't even have to explain it. Like, woo, what a, like, just weight off of you. Does that make sense?
It does. Many people don't realize that you're allowed to switch therapists. You're allowed to fire your
Mhm,
therapist. You're allowed to request a therapist of the just for so many things. People
mhm,
feel that and I understand it. We're all trying to be good people, and you're like, well, maybe you want a therapist that is your same religion, but you feel like you're discriminating against the other religions. You're not. It's okay to say, I was raised Presbyterian or
mhm.
Catholic or Jewish, or I'm an atheist, and I would like to see a therapist that is a member of the same religion as me. It's also okay to go to a therapist and see the therapist for a long time.
Oh,
I'm going
yeah.
to go with a year and be like, hey, we have now reached the end of your knowledge. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
getting, can you refer me to a therapist that meets this criteria? People think that
Yes.
it's rude, and it's not.
Yeah, just 1,000% to everything you said, because the therapist I talked about is one of the most incredible professionals I've ever met, and I respect her style of therapy so much. And we both mutually agreed at some point, okay, we've reached what the point that we can reach. And she referred me to somebody who had more awareness and actually was part of the LGBTQ community. So it was something we mutually agreed upon. And it was really great. I've never had that kind of mutual understanding with a therapist to be able to walk away and both grow and be happy for each other. And also, I'm a big fan of interviewing therapists. This last time trying to find a therapist, I interviewed like 3 to 5 therapists. I said, "Can we just do a 5-minute phone call?" And some therapists might ask that you do a whole session. That's not super accessible for people who can't afford to be doing multiple therapy sessions a month with while scouting out therapists. But I just highly recommend it.
Jules, this is just an observation, but you were at the end of therapy with one therapist, moving on to another one. So I'm from my seat. You still had something that you had to work on. We're going to call
Mhm,
that an issue. You still had an issue that you wanted to
mhm.
work on in therapy. You were leaving one therapist, moving to the next one, and as you're talking about it, you're beaming, you're happy,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
glowing. You're talking. See, this this is what we want to work toward, right? You were the person. I was not there, but it sounded to me like you were saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded to me like you were saying, hey, we reached this agreement. I felt validated. The person helped me get what I needed.
Mhm,
And in that way, this made the transition better. I was in a good place. And I imagine you jumped right into with the new therapist to the issue that you were working on. And this had to save a lot of time. This had to help you feel, again, I'm desperately trying not to put words in your mouth, but
mhm.
I imagine it was a very validating experience that left you feeling mentally healthy and in a good position to get the help that you felt you needed, which of course is just the core of
Mhm.
suicide prevention is.
Yeah. I would say long term, yes, I agree with that portrait. In the moment, I remember texting a friend and being like, "I feel like I just broke up with a boyfriend," like, just horribly, like, sobbing, feeling super upset, wondering if I made the right choice, and we had hurt feelings, but I what I really appreciate that we did is we took a break. There were a few months where I didn't do any therapy. I had been doing a lot of intensive treatment that year, needed a break. And then we did a closure session. And that because we did the closure session, that's why I have these happy feelings, is because I got to go through the full grief process. And then I went into therapy with a new therapist. And because I'd had a little bit of a break, I was like, here are the very specific things I want to work on. And also, I know that we usually say issue with like a negative connotation, but I hope I'm in therapy for the rest of my life. I love it. I feel like I am always finding out new things about myself, and exploration can be a very positive thing.
I'm 100% with you, Jules. I always learn something about myself. My wife and I recently went to marriage therapy. Now I'm old, so recently is like 3 years ago, but everything runs together once you hit about 40.
Mhm.
But I told people, I was like, yeah, my wife and I are going to marriage therapy, and they're like, what's wrong? And
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
like,
they're
nothing.
assuming that you're divorcing, right?
Right. Like nothing. That's why we're going. No, clearly nothing is a little bit that
Mhm,
there was clearly some reason, something that we wanted to work on, but there wasn't this like schism. We weren't on the rocks. We weren't
mhm,
dividing up the stuff and trying to figure out who got the dog, but we had something that we couldn't work out on our own.
mhm.
And we had this avenue, and we had
Yes.
a independent third party observer that could help us explore and figure out the best path forward. Now, that's marriage therapy.
Mhm.
Obviously, individual therapy works slightly differently, but in much the same way. So
Absolutely. You
I
don't
love
need
this.
a life-shattering issue to prompt you to go. People, I will say, "Is this serious enough? Does this qualify me enough to go to therapy?" And I'm like, I'm sorry, you don't need to qualify. I mean, I guess to a degree, you do need to qualify for therapy, and if you want insurance to cover it, you need different kinds of qualifiers, but that's a whole other box I
Yeah.
won't get into. Um, my current therapist is always like, ignore whatever label I put on you for the sake of insurance. I'm doing that to help you get this covered. Just focus on what we're talking about and don't read into that. Sorry, my cat just came in. Decided he wanted
Hey,
to jump
kitty.
around. But I don't know if you. I agree with. I have a problem that I can't solve on my own. I need someone's help with it. We go to friends and family, maybe. That doesn't work. Here's a third party person who's unbiased and whose job is to help you get through the weeds of it. And that can
Beautiful.
mean processing trauma. It can mean I want to get connected to my inner child. It can mean I just got someone told me I have depression or ADHD and I don't know what the heck that means. Um, it's I want to be able to communicate better with people because sometimes I get emotional. It can be a lot of things.
Wonderful, Jules. Thank you. Thank you. The next question that we have is, what's the importance of cultural responsiveness when supporting individuals with mental health conditions? And I know we've sort
Yeah.
of talked about a lot of
Mhm.
this, but building on that.
Yeah, I think building on it, it's helping someone feel seen. When we talk to people who have mental illness, we want them to feel like their symptoms are acknowledged and validated. We always want to make sure someone's feelings feel heard. And it's the same thing with our cultural identity. And like I said, with that example of I didn't even know how my chronic pain management fit into my mental health treatment until someone opened that door for me. But that's how it is with a lot of cultural responsiveness. And a classic example I can share of is, uh, for example, I've always known, even when I was younger and really didn't know a lot about my self identity, I knew I was not religious. And so that was a really easy thing for me to say, I'm not going to vibe with someone who is super religious because they're going to be trying their best to connect to me through scripture. And it's just going to go over my head. It's just not going to work. Respect it, not for me. Or some people might say, I really can't see a male therapist. That's an example of a cultural preference and wanting a female therapist who has the cultural responsiveness to meet you where you are as a woman. Um, and so it's just a part of therapy, to me at least. But to folks who may not understand it, it's just a way of helping you feel more seen and recognized, and not having to explain yourself. And that can even go for your diagnosis. I know for folks who maybe are experiencing first episode psychosis or schizophrenia, if you're working with a provider who usually just works with depression and anxiety, but isn't used to someone who has hallucinations, or delusions, that's going to be a difficult transition. You want a therapist who's able to recognize your culture and whom they need to understand the ins and outs of that, if that makes sense. Because
It
for some
does. It does.
people, they may view their hallucinations in a positive way, and that's kind of their culture and their relationship with it. So that's why it's important, at least in my opinion.
Jules, I couldn't agree more. It's very individualized, and therapy needs to be a safe place, and safe places are created by the individual. And
Mhm.
I, anybody listening, I want to understand that there's sort of a hard stop on you get to choose your therapist, you get to choose your providers, and again, that is somewhat of a privileged statement because not everybody can, unfortunately, because of things like insurance, money, or access. But if things are going well and you have the ability to choose, I highly recommend it. And if unfortunately you're in a place where there's just not a lot of choices, this is where we need advocates to rise up. This is the
Mhm.
reason that we need a diverse amount of therapists and people and an understanding. And if there is not that option, we need to be understanding to the person who is not getting, in fact, the best care. And I do think we need to own it. What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm thinking
Mhm.
about the entirety of America, and there's so many small towns that have two therapists,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's impossible. It is impossible for two people to encompass all cultural
Mhm.
relevancy and to meet to check all of the boxes. How do we work with Jules if
Mhm.
they can't access the best care? Because obviously the second best care is better than no
Mhm.
care, but it's still the second best care.
Oh, it's exactly, and that's why it's essentially almost like a workforce development issue and just a racism issue in general and accessibility, and that we don't have enough folks from historically marginalized communities to who feel like they can go get education and counseling or social work and then go become a therapist. Maybe there's different barriers in their life, or maybe it's just something that doesn't feel possible for them, or they don't have people encouraging them and paving the way for them the way that you or I might. And so that's one factor. But then the second thing, and so we need to advocate for better resources for them and to encourage and empower them so that they do become therapists or whatever profession they want to do. And then on the other hand, it's like you said, there's simply not enough therapists of every individual culture to
Right.
meet someone one on one. You know, like I said, my therapist is really has a lot of lived experience in chronic illness management, but I'm not aware of her being a part of the LGBTQ community. So it's not like she hits every single box, but she has enough cultural responsiveness to meet me where I need to be met. She's done enough trainings and webinars and worked with enough clients, made enough mistakes on her way that she is in a place where she can talk about it and she can work through it with me, even though that's not her lived experience. And so that's what we hope for providers to get to that point, in that you don't need to feel like, oh, because of my religion or my skin color or my gender identity, I'll never be able to help this person. You can absolutely still help. You just need to get to a point where you feel like you're not asking your client questions to learn about their identity, but rather to learn about their experience and their relationship with their identity. And to kind of clarify that, I'm a writer and I saw somebody talk about how if you're going to write characters of different backgrounds than you need to know what their relationship to their identity is. Simply knowing that they're Black is not enough.
Jules, thank you so much. I know we're getting to the end, but I have a final question here, unless the audience wants to jump in, which you're, of course, always welcome to do. Why is it important to acknowledge that people hold historically marginalized identities when treating them? Can't we just treat everybody the same? And I don't want to go there because we hear a lot of phrases. I don't see color. I treat everybody exactly the
Yes.
same. And these phrases are designed to be helpful, but they're anything but. Can you talk on that?
Yes, and I think that's kind of the next wave of activism we're getting to in this century is recognizing that those statements are actually harmful rather than helpful now. And I also want to define historically marginalized because that's a term I recently learned. And it's to basically say that this is a person that's not just a minority, but historically, throughout time and society, they have been marginalized by the systems and the powers that are in place. This has been a systemic issue that has made them marginalized. And so it really emphasizes how much of that is a societal issue. And if we don't, there's, I'm trying to think of the right word. I think that sometimes we can be a bit optimistic when we're talking to folks with mental illness and just say, just keep trying and eventually you'll get there. But there's no amount of hope or optimism that can break down a systemic issue that's based off of inequity. That is outside of my control. I, for example, worked in a workplace where I was not allowed to put pronouns in my email signature. No one was. That was a systemic issue of inequity and lack of inclusion that I could not hope and pray my way out of. It was something I had to learn how to adapt to. And trust me, I fought and advocated the best that I could, but there was no way around it. And my therapist was really helpful in helping me understand that there are things I can accept and things I cannot accept, but also things I can control and not control. And if we just keep telling people who are historically marginalized from any identity, just keep trying, we're not acknowledging that this is out of their control.
Jules, thank you. Thank you. It has been wonderful to have you here. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. Do you have any final thoughts? Is there anything and I know it's a lot. We've been talking for almost 50 minutes. What should folks' takeaway be? Are there any loose ends that you want to tie up? It's a big subject, and I hope that people will continue to learn. Please don't make as great as Jules is, please don't make them your entire source of information on this subject. As great as I think you are. So hopefully people will keep learning. But Jules, final thoughts for folks.
Yes, and I'm just going to rattle off some thoughts here. You are never done learning. I am never done learning. I still, when I go to a conference, I attend the sessions on LGBTQ issues because things are always changing and I can always improve my knowledge, and also understand that people from different communities have different perspectives and different thoughts on the same issue. So there's that. Always keep learning. 2, diversify your social media feeds. And this includes your LinkedIn. Find people who are of completely different identities to you, but care about the same issues as you. Try to find people who are historically marginalized and maybe they're talking about it. There's a lot of really great DEI practitioners on LinkedIn that I have been following and learning a lot from. So check those people out, because if you can normalize your world online, at least, as being super diverse, you start to recognize that your real world may not be matching that. And that perhaps that's a problem you need to look into. 3, if you do engage with any of these content creators, or you decide you want to do follow-up work with me or anyone else, make sure you are paying people for their work. This kind of work requires a lot of emotional labor. These are questions that I don't answer if I'm just walking down the street. I signed up to be on this webinar, do this educational work. This is work. And I deserve to be compensated for that. I am, of course, volunteering my time today, but consider that. If there's someone who you are learning so much from, sign up for their Patreon, Venmo them, take their course that you have to pay for, do whatever you can to give back to that person and show them that you really acknowledge them. Because if we don't do that, we're just kind of exploiting them for their labor, if I'm being really radical and honest here. My last plug is I have a consulting business. If you want to follow up with me and do more conversations, happy to come do a presentation, tailor it to your community's needs, or just support a family member or friend who wants to be able to support their loved one. That work is essential too.
What is that website?
So I do not have a website yet for my consulting, but you can follow me on LinkedIn. Just search Jules Wilson. I'll have my profile picture of pink purple hair, so you can't really miss me. And I live in Nashville, so just search by that criteria. And I'm also on Instagram. Let me find it right now.
I'm typing as fast as I can. I wrote consult. I want to flash it on the screen there. Consulting information. Search Jules Wilson on Instagram from Nashville.
Oh, sorry, LinkedIn. Search on LinkedIn.
Oh, hang on. I meant LinkedIn. Search. This is always the best part of the show where Gabe types everything wrong.
I love it. It's totally cool.
Yay! Did I get it right this time? Consulting information. Search Jules Wilson on LinkedIn
search on
from
LinkedIn.
Nashville.
Look for the purple hair and the pronouns, and you're set.
Beautiful. I will also drop that in the chat right before we disconnect. Jules, thank you so much for being here. Sincerely, I'm trying to talk and type at the same time, and I am terrible at it. There we go. Search Jules Wilson on LinkedIn from Nashville. Please, everybody, check them out. They do awesome work, as you just saw from the last hour. Jules, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. Thanks to Kyle for reaching out. I'm always happy to talk about this. I'm a big believer that education should be accessible, so that's why it's important to volunteer your time as well as get compensated for it, because knowing that people are learning is that's what keeps me going and makes me want to keep talking about it. So thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. All right, everybody. One, give Jules a big, big round of applause. They were awesome. And as they told you, volunteered their time. Thank you, Jules. And also, I do this every show. NAMI Tennessee's email list. If you stumbled upon this, you would have known that they were going to be here because you would have gotten the email. See, it's just as simple as that. Go to namitn.org and sign up. And hey, it's not a bad website. We will see everybody next time on NAMI Tennessee at Home.